The Haunting of Hollow Ridge. Episode 11, The Last Breath. Nina opened her eyes to find herself once again within the cold, decaying walls of Hollow Ridge. Her body was heavy, as though the house itself was crushing her beneath its weight. Her limbs were weak, her breath shallow. How many times had they been through this? How many times had they run, fought, and fallen back into the house's clutches? The others, Daniel, Tom, Jack, and Grace, were scattered around her, lying still as if the house had drained their very souls. Nina tried to call out, but her voice barely came out, just a faint whisper in the still, suffocating air. "Daniel," she croaked, forcing herself to crawl toward him. The house was eerily silent, the once familiar groans of the rotting wood and the rustle of unseen footsteps gone. The oppressive energy that had haunted them from the moment they stepped inside seemed to have quieted, but that only made it worse. The silence was unnatural, like the calm before a storm. Nina reached Daniel's side and shook him gently. His eyes fluttered open, filled with confusion and fear. We're back," Daniel murmured, barely able to speak. "I know," Nina whispered, her voice shaking with despair. "It's not letting us go." Tom stood a few feet away, groaning as he tried to push himself up. "What the hell is going on? Why can't we escape?" Grace was awake now too, her eyes wide with panic. "We broke the curse. We destroyed the house. We never left," Nina finished, her voice hollow. "The house has always been in control. It doesn't matter what we do." Jack sat up slowly, rubbing his head. No, there has to be a way. There's always a way." But as they sat there, the weight of the truth settled over them. They weren't just trapped in the house, they were part of it now. The house had claimed them, and no amount of fighting would free them from its grip. "I'm not giving up," Tom growled, standing up and moving to the nearest door. He yanked at the handle, but it didn't budge. The door, like everything else in the house, seemed to mock their attempts to escape. He banged on it with his fists, shouting, "Let us out!" The house remained still, unyielding. Suddenly, a low voice echoed through the room, smooth and familiar. "You are not prisoners. You are guests." The group froze, their eyes darting around the room. There was no sign of the figure they had encountered before, but its presence was undeniable. "Guests?" Nina repeated, her voice trembling with anger. "We've been tortured. Hunted. What kind of host does that?" The voice chuckled darkly. "You misunderstand, my dear. You are not here by accident. You came to Hollow Ridge seeking answers, and now you have them." "What are you talking about?" Daniel demanded, stepping forward. "We didn't ask for any of this." The voice grew softer, almost soothing. "But you did. You all came with your fears, your doubts, your regrets. Hollow Ridge simply gave you what you wanted." Nina's heart raced. Could that be true? She had been looking for closure, searching for answers about the darkness that had haunted her dreams for so long. Had the house known? Had it preyed on their deepest fears, drawing them in like moths to a flame? "You're lying," Grace spat. "We just wanted to escape this nightmare." "Escape?" The voice was amused. "There is no escape, because there was never a prison. This is where you belong. This is where you always belonged." The room began to shift around them, the walls stretching and twisting in unnatural ways. The floor beneath their feet rippled, and the once solid walls seemed to melt into shadows. The house was changing, evolving, becoming something new, something worse. "No!" Tom shouted, backing away. "This can't be happening." "We have to fight it," Jack said, his voice desperate. "We can't let it control us." But as the house transformed around them, Nina could feel the truth settling deep in her bones. This was their fate. Hollow Ridge wasn't just a place, it was alive, feeding off their fears, their pain, their souls. The floor beneath them began to crack, and dark tendrils of shadow reached up from the ground, wrapping around their ankles and pulling them down. The house was consuming them, drawing them deeper into its dark, twisted heart. Nina struggled against the shadows, but it was no use. The more she fought, the tighter they wrapped around her, pulling her further into the darkness. "We have to let go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We have to stop fighting it." "What?" Daniel looked at her, his eyes wide with fear. "What are you saying?" "I don't know how," Nina continued, tears streaming down her face. "But this fighting, it's what the house feeds on. Maybe if we stop." "That's insane," Tom shouted, but he too was being pulled under, his struggles only making the shadows tighten their grip. Nina closed her eyes, her body trembling. "We have to accept it. Maybe that's the only way." With that, she stopped resisting. She let the shadows wrap around her, pulling her down into the darkness. The others watched in horror as she disappeared beneath the floor. "Nina!" Daniel shouted, reaching out for her, but she was already gone. Grace screamed, tears streaming down her face, as the tendrils of shadow pulled her under as well. Jack and Tom fought until the very end, but one by one, they too were consumed by the house. The silence that followed was deafening. The house stood still, cold, and empty, as if nothing had ever happened. And then, slowly, the shadows receded. Nina opened her eyes. She was standing in front of Hollow Ridge. The house was as it had always been, ancient, decrepit, and looming ominously over the landscape. The air was thick with tension, and the forest around them was eerily quiet. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she turned to see the others standing beside her, Daniel, Tom, Jack, and Grace, alive, whole, and as confused as she was. "We're back," Grace whispered, her voice shaky. "How?" Nina looked at the house, her mind racing. Had they been given a second chance? Had the house let them go? But deep down, she knew the truth. They weren't free. They never would be. The house had released them, but only so it could trap them again. It was part of the cycle. A never-ending nightmare. As the group stood there, the weight of their fate settled over them like a shroud. Hollow Ridge had claimed them, and no matter how far they ran, no matter how hard they fought, they would always end up back here. Together, they turned and walked away from the house, their steps heavy with the knowledge that this was only the beginning. The house would call them back, again and again, until there was nothing left of them. And somewhere in the distance, a soft voice whispered in the wind, "Welcome back." End of episode 11.